Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are stepping into a shadow, one that's haunted London, really, and, well, our collective imagination for over a century now. Our focus is the Whitechapel murders of 1888. It's a case that remains, I think it's fair to say, the world's most enduring true crime mystery.
Yeah, absolutely. And our mission today, it goes beyond just, reciting the facts of this unsolved case. The sources we've looked at, they really demand we look deeper.
Deeper how?
Well, not just at who the killer might have been, but the world that sort of incubated him, the specific lives he took, the women involved, and actually the powerful, maybe unintended legacy the terror left behind.
Yeah.
We're going to try and sort of reclaim the human story from the legend of the monster.
Okay. Let's unpack this then. Setting the scene feels crucial. You really have to feel it, I think, to understand the environment this killer operated in. So let's plunge into late August 1888. We're in the heart of London's East End, Whitechapel.
Right. And the first thing you'd notice, according to all the sources, is this absolute sensory overload. It's dominated by the air itself. Peak industrial age London. The descriptions paint this picture of a thick, damp cocktail that just permeated everything.
That cocktail?
Yeah.
Yeah, multiple layers, right? Up top, you've got that acrid, choking smog, the famous pea super from all the coal dust.
Made everything perpetually gray, blurring day and night.
But down low near the street, the smell. That was something else entirely, truly overwhelming, apparently.
Yeah, underneath the coal dust, you had the stench of open sewers, just running in ditches, overflowing. A pretty grim picture of the sanitation failure there.
And that wasn't all, was it?
No, add to that the sort of metallic tang from slaughterhouses nearby, chemical fumes from tanneries, that sour smell of fermentation from cheap gin everywhere.
Unwashed humanity refuse piled up.
Exactly. It was this suffocating, almost tangible miasma, they called it.
And even if you could see through that gloom, the place itself, the physical layout, it was like an accomplice to crime, wasn't it?
Totally. Whitechapel was a labyrinth.
Yeah.
Full of these narrow, twisting alleyways, lightless courtyards, dead ends they called narrows.
And the lighting, gas lamps, I suppose?
Where they even existed, yeah. Often sputtering, weak, casting these long, dancing shadows that could hide pretty much anything or anyone.
It sounds like a perfect operational environment for a predator.
Absolutely. Anonymity was just built into the architecture. Someone could easily watch, strike, and then just vanish back into that maze.
And that's exactly how the terror began, right? In the pre-dawn hours of August 31st.
Yes. The first victim was Marianne Nichols, known as Polly.
And the discovery, how did that happen?
He was made by a carter, a guy named Charles Cross. He was late for work, walking down Bucks Row. He saw this shape by a stable gateway. In the half-light, he initially thought it was just like a discarded tarpaulin or something.
Gross.
Yeah. But when he got closer, he realized it was a woman. She was apparently still warm to the touch.
Wow.
And Cross, along with another man who came along, Robert Paul, they did this strange sort of instinctive thing. They pulled her skirt down to cover her lower half. An act of decency, I suppose.
Before running for help.
Yeah, they went off to find a constable. But it wasn't until PC John Neal arrived, shone his lantern right on the scene. That's when the scale of the violence became sickeningly clear.
How so?
Polly's throat had been cut. So violently, she was almost decapitated. The initial thought was, okay, this is brutal, but maybe, a straightforward murder?
But it wasn't.
No. The truly disturbing part came later, at the mortuary. They discovered the extent of the mutilation, a deep, jagged wound ripping open the lower part of her abdomen.
Oh, God.
That was the moment the police knew. This wasn't just violence. This was meticulous, calculated. It was a statement, not a robbery gone wrong. They were dealing with someone very different.
Okay, so that horror, that first discovery, it really has to be seen against the backdrop of the district itself, doesn't it? Whitechapel wasn't just where it happened. It was, as you said, the sources emphasize, this societal pressure cooker.
Exactly. The environment basically dictated the pool of victims and shielded the killer.
To really get the atmosphere, you need to understand the extreme disconnect in Victorian London, right? The two Londons.
Absolutely. You had the West End, unimaginable wealth, grand balls, huge houses, more servants than residents. Then, just a few miles east, you had the East End, where social surveys even then showed over a third of the population lived in what they called dire poverty.
And dire poverty wasn't just like being short of cash. It meant literally not affording the basics to feed or clothe yourself, your family.
Survival was this constant day-to-day struggle, often revolving around a single tiny sum of money. 4 pence. That was the price for a bed in a common lodging house, a doss house. For women like Polly, that fourpence was the absolute line between a, meager, crowded roof over her head and sleeping rough, exposed.
Yeah.
Making her a perfect, vulnerable target.
The economics behind this are just staggering. They really reveal the rot in the system.
The sources highlight this brutal math of starvation. A typical laborer, maybe working on the docks or some other casual job, might earn between 6 and 12 shillings a week, if they found consistent work.
Which wasn't guaranteed.
Not at all. Yet studies show that a basic food budget for just a small family in Whitechapel, just enough to prevent actual starvation, exceeded 15 shillings a week.
The math just didn't work.
It guaranteed failure for most people. It was baked into the system.
And when the math doesn't work, society starts to break down, right? Survival by legitimate means alone. It was impossible for so many.
Especially for the most vulnerable. Women separated from family support, maybe struggling with addiction like Polly. Prostitution became, well, almost a forced path for some.
Just to survive.
Yeah. Selling themselves for as little as 3 pence, maybe just enough to scrape together that 4 pence for the doss house bed. Or sometimes, even more tragically, sources say, just for a stale loaf of bread.
God, it's bleak. And beyond the money, the physical housing just made everything worse, these rookeries.
Yeah, the rookeries were the worst slums. Old houses, maybe built for one family originally, illegally subdivided again and again. You could find 30, maybe more people crammed into a space meant for 5. Filth. Perpetual darkness.
And the lodging houses, the doss houses themselves, they weren't much better, were they?
They perfected the efficiency of misery, really. You didn't rent a bed for the night. You rented a time slot, a space.
Right, the 3 8-hour shifts.
Exactly. Beds rented out round the clock. Sleep wasn't rest. It was this fragmented, commoditized thing. Different strangers cycling through the same dirty space while you were out trying to earn your 4 pence.
That constant churn, the lack of privacy, it must have completely eroded any sense of community.
Utterly.
Mm-hmm.
And into this already teeming, desperate place, you had this massive added strain. Mass immigration.
The Irish first, fleeing the famine.
Mid-19th century, yeah. Then by the 1880s, tens of thousands of Jewish refugees pouring in, escaping these violent pogroms in Russia and Eastern Europe.
And they came to Whitechapel, why? Just because it was cheap.
Marginally cheaper housing, yeah, despite the squalor. But their arrival just ramped up the overcrowding exponentially, and it fueled these intense social tensions.
Existing residents felt threatened.
Perceived the newcomers as undercutting the already pathetic wages, making the overcrowding worse. It just increased this sense of chaotic anonymity.
So Whitechapel became this community, but mostly of strangers.
Yeah, people speaking different languages, different customs, everyone focused purely on their own survival, this systemic distrust, neighbors unable or unwilling to vouch for each other. It created a perfect cover.
The perfect anonymity for a killer to move through.
Exactly. It was the essential accomplice to the crimes.
So that structural environment, the pressure cooker, it created the vulnerability. But now let's shift the focus, because as you said, the lasting story shouldn't just be the killer, but the 5 women. We need to look at their individual stories, their journeys, that slow, cruel slide that brought them into his path.
Absolutely. Starting with Marianne Nichols, Polly, the first victim. She was 43. And she didn't start out destitute. Came from a respectable background, actually. Daughter of a blacksmith, married a printer's machinist, had 5 children. She had stability.
But it fractured.
Yeah, her marriage became difficult. Seems primarily due to her struggle with alcohol dependence. This led to separation and then that terrifying cycle of having to rely on the workhouse. The Lambeth workhouse in her case.
The ultimate symbol of failure and humiliation back then.
Totally. But here's the really heartbreaking detail. Just months before her death, she actually found a glimmer of hope. She got a job as a domestic servant. Yeah, she wrote this letter to her father talking about her employers, describing them as teetotalers and religious. She was trying to reassure him, maybe yourself too, that she'd finally found stable ground.
But it didn't last.
No. The addiction, it seems, proved too powerful. She was pulled back to the streets, eventually ending up needing those 4 pence for a bed. The bed she never reached on August 31st. Died chasing shelter and sobriety.
God. Then Annie Chapman, Dark Annie. She was 47.
Sources describe her as quite intelligent, capable when sober, recognizable by her wavy dark brown hair. She was married to a coachman, had 3 children.
Her story seems rooted in tragedy, too. Loss.
Very much so. Her oldest daughter died young, meningitis, age 12. Her youngest son had a physical disability, the stress, the grief. It seems to have driven both Annie and her husband to severe drink and eventually separation.
And when he died?
The small allowance she depended on stopped completely, cut off.
So she had to fend for herself.
Yeah. She tried. Used what skills she had. Tried making a living selling little handmade things like crocheted flowers, matches in Spitalfields.
Just trying to scrape by.
But in that economic environment, simple hard work, it just wasn't enough to outrun destitution. And she, too, fell into that cycle of needing nightly shelter.
Okay, next is Elizabeth Stride. Long Liz, 44. Her background was a bit different.
Yeah, unusual for the area. Tall woman, 5'5". A Swedish immigrant from Gothenburg. Police records back in Sweden actually listed her as a prostitute early on, and she'd had the trauma of a stillborn child.
But she tried to build a life in London.
She did. She married an older carpenter, and for a while they even ran a small coffee shop together. But when that marriage failed, her descent into poverty was swift and profound.
And her desperation led her to telling stories.
Elaborate ones, yeah. Incredibly sad, really. She repeatedly told people this specific lie, that she had lost her husband and both her children in the infamous Princess Alice steamboat disaster of 1878.
Which wasn't true at all.
Complete fabrication. Just think about that. Creating this detailed fictional tragedy to gain sympathy, maybe a few pennies. It just powerfully illustrates the kind of psychological warfare poverty wages on you.
Wow. Catherine Eddowes, then. 46. She sounds like she had a bit more spark.
Yeah, described as a very jolly woman always singing, though apparently she also had a fierce temper. She'd lived with a man named Thomas Conway for 20 years, even had his initials, TC, tattooed on her arm, a visible sign of a long, committed relationship, even if common law.
And how did they get by?
They scraped by selling cheap books and ballads, little songs that Conway wrote. Like Polly and Annie, though, she struggled with drink. That seems to have led to her separating from Conway eventually and relying on the lodging houses, too.
And her final hours. There's such a cruel twist there.
A really poignant juxtaposition. Evening of September 29th, she's found drunk on the street. Police pick her up, take her to Bishopsgate Police Station to sleep it off. Standard procedure.
So she was actually safe in custody?
For a few hours, yeah. They released her at 1 a.m. on September 30th.
And the policeman who let her go? He remembered her last words.
He did. Cheerful, apparently.
Yeah.
As she staggered back out into the Whitechapel streets, she said, "Good night, old cock."
And just 45 minutes later?
She was found dead in Mitre Square, killed by the Ripper, walked straight out of police custody into her death. It's chilling.
Unbelievably so. Finally, Mary Jane Kelly, only 25, the youngest, and the most mysterious.
Arguably, yeah. Her past is this patchwork of stories she told people. Self-created mythology, maybe. Conflicting tales. A well-to-do Irish family. A husband who died in a coal mining accident. Even a glamorous stint in a high-class brothel over in Paris.
Hard to know what was true.
Impossible, really.
Yeah.
Separating the survival stories from the reality. But the reality of her end, that's brutally clear.
She was the only one killed indoors, right?
Yes. In her tiny, squalid little room. Just 12 foot square at 13 Miller's Court. And that detail, the privacy, the time it afforded the killer, that's what sets her murder apart. Makes it the most horrifying of them all, in many ways.
These weren't just abstract victims, were they?
Not at all. They were individuals whose lives were systematically degraded by the very society that then largely ignored their brutal end, until the killer made it impossible to ignore.
Okay, so we need to track the killer's methods now. Because the violence, it wasn't static, was it? There was an escalation, a methodological progression almost. It suggests this horrifying sense of growing confidence, maybe even an experimental purpose across the canonical 5 victims.
Definitely an escalation. The first victim, Marianne Nichols, August 31st. She showed the basic pattern. Throat slit twice, then that deep, jagged abdominal wound. But the very next victim, Annie Chapman, on September 8th. That's when the killer's specific targeted focus really became clear.
And that's when the citywide unease tipped into full-blown panic.
Exactly. Because the mutilation on Annie Chapman was far more extensive than Polly's. Her abdomen wasn't just wounded, it was laid completely open. Her intestines were actually pulled out and disturbingly draped over her shoulder.
That's meticulous, not frenzy.
No, it felt like organized savagery. And the single most chilling detail for the investigators, the thing that really shifted the focus, the targeted removal of an organ. Her uterus.
It was gone, taken from the scene.
Deliberately excised and taken. And that detail immediately suggested the killer wasn't just a random butcher. He was a harvester, maybe. Someone focused on precise anatomical targets.
Which pointed towards?
Well, Instantly, it pointed towards someone with maybe medical knowledge, surgical skill, or perhaps extensive butchery experience. The search immediately had to expand beyond just, common criminals or thugs.
Okay. Then there was silence for 3 weeks, and then the killer returned with a vengeance, September 30th, the night that became known as the double event.
Yes, a night that showed us both his potential frustration, perhaps, and his compensatory rage.
Oh, so?
Well, first, at 1 a.m., Elizabeth Stride was found in a place called Dutfield's Yard. Her throat was slit, like the others. But crucially, there was no further mutilation.
Why not? What was the theory?
The prevailing police theory, and it holds a lot of weight, is that the killer was interrupted, right in the act, or just seconds after.
Interrupted by who?
The source material points to a man named Louis Deemschutz. He was a steward at a working men's club nearby, arriving back in his pony cart. He pulled into the dark yard, and his pony shied at something on the ground.
Stride's body.
Yes. Evidence suggested the killer was only seconds gone. The blood was still flowing freely, apparently still warm on the ground when Deemschutz found her. The planned surgical ritual, whatever it was going to be, was thwarted.
But he didn't just flee.
No. And this is terrifying. Instead of running from the district, in this incredible display of audacity, maybe immediate compensation for being interrupted, he seems to have immediately sought a replacement victim.
Right away.
Less than an hour later, at 1:45 a.m., Catherine Eddowes was found, just a short walk away in Mitre Square.
Mitre Square, that was significant jurisdictionally, wasn't it?
Right on the border between the Metropolitan Police Patch and the City of London Police, which caused its own problems later. But for the killer, it became the scene where his frustration seems to have been carved into the body.
The violence was worse this time.
Exponentially worse. Her throat was slit, abdomen ripped open, like before, but she also suffered severe facial mutilation. Cuts across her cheeks, eyelids, almost like an attempt to erase her identity.
And the organs.
Making up for the interruption was Stride. Her left kidney and her uterus had been removed and taken from the scene. He achieved his anatomical goal this time, but added this element of vicious, personal rage, maybe.
It's like he wouldn't be denied.
Exactly. And then, after another tense month of quiet, came the climax, Mary Jane Kelly, November 9th. This wasn't just a murder. Sources describe it as an act of complete annihilation.
Because she was killed indoors, at 13 Miller's Court.
Precisely. That gave the killer something he hadn't really had before. Unlimited time, complete privacy, no fear of interruption like in Dutfield's Yard.
And the scene, it was horrific.
So horrific that police records noted her body was mutilated literally beyond recognition. Her face was hacked away, breasts cut off.
Oh my God.
But the most disturbing detail, perhaps, was the methodical arrangement of body parts. Organs, liver, intestines, spleen were removed and meticulously arranged around the room, some on the bedside table.
Arranged, not just discarded.
Arranged. And just as with Eddowes, the heart had been taken from the scene.
Yeah.
Suggesting this continuation of his anatomical collection, whatever his purpose was.
The progression is chillingly clear.
Yeah. From quick, brutal butchery with Polly to targeted organ harvesting with Annie, then an interrupted rage immediately compensated for with Catherine, and finally, this prolonged, meticulous destruction indoors with Mary Jane. It's like watching a craftsman perfect a terrible, terrible method.
The violence itself was terrifying London, obviously. But it was the bizarre letters, the correspondence, wasn't it? And the media's reaction to it. That's what really transformed this anonymous murderer into Jack the Ripper.
Absolutely. The press didn't just report the story. In many ways, they created the brand, the legend.
And the creation myth starts with the Dear Boss letter.
Yes. That arrived at the Central News Agency on September 27th. Just 3 days before the double event, remember, it was written in red ink, had this mocking, arrogant tone. Shockingly playful, really. The writer claimed, "I have laughed when they look so clever," talking about the police.
And the signature. That was the key bit.
Yours truly, Jack the Ripper. That specific name, that moniker, it instantly caught fire. Although initially the police correctly dismissed it, they were getting hundreds of hoax letters.
Right, just noise.
But the letter's status changed dramatically after the double event, specifically Catherine Eddowes' murder. Because the letter had contained this chilling little promise, "The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ears off."
And Eddowes was found with part of her earlobe severed.
Exactly. Suddenly the letter felt like a prophecy. It forced the investigators, and certainly the press, to take the name Jack the Ripper seriously.
And that wasn't the only letter, was it?
No, quickly followed by the saucy Jackie postcard. October 1st, postmarked the day after the double event. It explicitly referred to the killings as the double event this time, Now, that phrase, double event, wasn't public knowledge yet.
So that lent it more credibility.
In the eyes of the frantic press and public, yes. It seemed like insider knowledge.
But the really gruesome piece of mail, the one that seemed to bridge the gap between hoax and actual horror, that was the From Hell letter.
That's the one. Sent to George Lusk, who was head of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee, a group of local businessmen trying to help the police. Sent on October 16th.
And it wasn't just a letter, was it?
No. Lusk received a small cardboard box. Inside was half of a human kidney, preserved in spirits, probably gin or ethanol.
Oh, God.
And the note with it, scrawled in this sort of uneducated hand, began simply, "From hell." The writer claimed he had fried and ate the other half, said it was very nice.
And this connected to Eddowes.
Precisely. Catherine Eddowes' left kidney had been missing, removed by the killer. So the arrival of this grisly piece of anatomical evidence, it created a media sensation, obviously, but also raised the very real possibility that this at least was genuine communication from the killer, a physical gesture of contempt, a horrifying confirmation of his surgical focus.
So what did the police do? They were facing public hysteria.
They made a desperate decision, and ultimately a profile-defining one. They published facsimiles, copies of the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jackie postcard in the newspapers.
Why? Hoping someone would recognize the handwriting.
Exactly. A long shot, but they were desperate.
But the consequence?
It solidified the Ripper's iconic status forever. Sensationalist papers, like the Star, they just ran with it. They created this image of the cunning, taunting phantom in a cloak and top hat, this terrifying literary figure operating above the law.
And the tragic irony.
The actual murderer, whoever he was, immediately got lost in this media frenzy. We know now, or it's widely accepted, that at least one journalist later confessed to writing both the Dear Boss letter and the postcard.
Just to sell papers.
Yeah, to keep the business alive, as he put it, to keep the story hot.
So the press actually created the character, gave the evil a name.
Largely, yes. The only piece of correspondence still considered by many, many researchers to be potentially authentic is that gruesome From Hell letter, because it was paired with undeniable physical evidence linked to a victim. But the name, the persona, the media forged that enduring myth, and the real killer's identity got permanently obscured behind it.
So let's look at the police trying to catch this ghost. Inspector Frederick Aberline from Scotland Yard, he was heading what sounds like, well, an impossible investigation.
Utterly impossible, really. They were fighting a modern monster, essentially, with medieval tools.
Right. Forensics were basically non-existent.
It was the absolute infancy of forensic science. Just imagine trying to solve a complex serial murder case today without any of the tools we just take for granted. No DNA analysis, obviously, no blood typing, and crucially, no fingerprinting.
Fingerprinting hadn't been adopted yet.
No. Scotland Yard wouldn't officially start using fingerprints as an identification tool for another 13 years.
Wow. So what did they have?
Very little. And their desperation showed in some really bizarre, kind of futile attempts. Like after Mary Kelly's murder, they actually took photographs of her eyes.
Why?
There was this fringe scientific theory floating around optography that the last image a person saw might somehow be imprinted on their retina. So they hoped, maybe, the killer's face would be there.
Did it work?
Of course not. An understandable reach, maybe, born of desperation and pseudoscience, but completely fruitless.
And compounding the lack of technology was just the chaos at the scenes, right?
Immediate chaos. Within minutes of a body being found, huge crowds of morbidly curious locals would just rush in, trampling all over any potential evidence footprints. Maybe a dropped button, hairs, blood spatter, everything contaminated instantly.
And the police themselves. They weren't great at scene preservation.
Partly to blame, yeah. Their number one priority, especially in the volatile East End, was preventing riots. Public order, not preserving a pristine crime scene. So their first instinct was always quick body removal.
Which meant vital evidence was lost.
Instantly compromised. Gone. And then you had systemic failures crippling the investigation from the top down.
Like being understaffed.
Hugely. Whitechapel's H Division, the local police, had only 15 detectives. 15. To handle this entire massive, sprawling area with nearly 80,000 volatile residents and hunt a serial killer, it was impossible.
And there was rivalry between police forces, too.
Yeah, corrosive jurisdictional rivalry. Came to a head with Catherine Eddowes, remember. Killed in Mitre Square, just feet inside the City of London Police District. Not the Metropolitan Police's patch where the other murders happened.
Created friction.
Miscommunication, delays, yeah. And this friction led to one of the biggest, maybe the biggest, investigative blunders. The chalk message controversy.
What was that?
After Edo's murder, a policeman found a piece of her bloodied apron discarded in a nearby doorway on Golston Street. And above it, on the wall, someone had written a message in chalk.
A clue from the killer.
Potentially. The exact wording was debated, recorded differently by different officers, but it was believed to be something like, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Clearly anti-Jewish, whatever the precise words.
Okay, so what happened?
The commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Charles Warren, personally came to the scene. And he, apparently fearing this message, would immediately incite huge anti-Jewish riots against the immigrant population, which was a genuine political fear at the time he ordered it washed away immediately.
Before it could be properly photographed.
Before it could be properly photographed or even definitively transcribed, a potentially critical piece of evidence, maybe even in the killer's own hand, deliberately destroyed based on political expediency, overriding thorough investigation. A massive loss.
So faced with all this no forensics, chaos, bad decisions, who did they even suspect?
Well, they did a huge amount of legwork. Over 2,000 interviews investigated more than 300 named suspects. But they were constantly misled by the hoax letters, the media noise. In the absence of a real answer, the public, and even the police privately, filled the void with speculation, which led to this parade of suspects, each one almost like a mirror, reflecting some deep-seated Victorian social fear.
Okay, let's talk about some of the main ones. Montague John Druitt.
Druitt. He represents that fear of the enemy within, doesn't he? The educated gentleman, secretly harboring madness, the classic Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde archetype. He was a barrister, a school teacher, Oxford graduate. Respectable. He committed suicide. Drowned himself in the Thames. His body was found December 31st, 1888. Shortly after the last canonical murder, Mary Kelly's in November.
The timing looks suspicious.
Highly suspicious.
Yeah.
And adding fuel to that, high-ranking police officials like Sir Melville Macnaghten privately named Druitt as their #1 suspect in internal memos years later. Macnaghten claimed Druitt's own family believed him to be the killer and that he was sexually insane. The neat timing of the murder stopping and his death, it made him incredibly compelling for a long time. Still does for some.
Okay. Then there's Aaron Kosminski. He represents a different fear.
The fear of the foreign threat, yeah. Kosminski was a Polish-Jewish immigrant, worked as a hairdresser in Whitechapel. He suffered from severe mental illness, paranoid schizophrenia, apparently, with auditory hallucinations and a paranoid hatred or fear of women. He was institutionalized in 1891.
And why was he suspected?
Senior officers, including the head at CID, claimed a key witness who was also Jewish had positively identified Kosminski shortly after one of the murders, but then refused to testify against a fellow Jew, destroying any chance of prosecution. Now, that's a controversial claim, maybe even prejudiced itself.
And there's been modern DNA stuff connected to him.
Highly disputed. Very controversial modern DNA analysis done on a shawl supposedly found near Catherine Eddowes' body. Some claim it points to Kosminski's descendants. Others completely debunk the science and the shawl's provenance. But regardless of the DNA debate, his presence on the suspect list really speaks to that Victorian anxiety about immigrants bringing violence and madness.
Right. Who else? Aaron Kosminski. George Chapman.
Another Polish immigrant. He adopted the name George Chapman, worked as a barber surgeon, had some medical knowledge. He was later executed years later, but for poisoning 3 of his common-law wives with antimony.
Poisoning? That doesn't sound like the Ripper's style.
Exactly. That's the problem. Inspector Aberlin himself, the man on the ground, strongly believed Chapman was the Ripper. But the methodology is just completely different. Why would a man whose known method was subtle, slow poisoning suddenly switch to brutal, high-risk, bloody butchery in the streets, only to potentially switch back later? A massive contradiction. Makes him unlikely, though historically significant, because Aberline backed him.
Okay, one more prominent one, Dr. Francis Tumblety.
Tumblety, the flamboyant American quaff doctor, known misogynist, apparently hated women intensely. There were stories, maybe just rumors, that he kept a collection of anatomical specimens, specifically uteruses in jars in his rooms.
Creepy, and he was in London.
He was in London during the murder spree. He was even arrested briefly on an unrelated charge, then skipped bail and fled back to the United States. He represents that fear of twisted medical knowledge, the mad doctor.
So ultimately, the investigation just produced phantoms.
Pretty much. A parade of phantoms reflecting the anxieties of the age. The killer remains a blank slate, absorbing the fears of every generation that comes back to study the case.
The killing stopped, seemingly after Mary Kelly in November 1888. But the shadow didn't just lift, did it? And here's the great, strange paradox of the Jack the Ripper story. The monster unintentionally brought a weird, necessary kind of light to the East End.
Absolutely. It's one of the most significant, if deeply uncomfortable, legacies of the case. The killings were just so sensational, so horrifyingly graphic, especially with the press coverage, that they finally forced the attention of wealthy, comfortable, powerful London onto the truly horrific social conditions in Whitechapel.
Conditions that had just been ignored for decades.
Willfully ignored, largely, out of sight, out of mind. But the Ripper dragged them into the spotlight.
Because the newspapers, in their frenzy to cover the murders, sent reporters deep into the slums.
Exactly. They weren't just reporting on the bodies. They were reporting on the rookeries, the doss houses, the grinding poverty, the disease, the filth they found all around the murder sites.
Ugh.
The systemic rot of that part of society was exposed alongside the monster.
And activists seized on that, didn't they? Like George Bernard Shaw.
Famously, yes. Shaw penned this scathing, incredibly sarcastic letter to the press. He basically argued, look, it took the brutal murder and disemboweling of 4 women to finally get you people to pay attention to the conditions that kill hundreds quietly every year. He bitterly exposed the monstrous social system, as he called it, that had condemned those women long before the Ripper ever found them.
And crucially, that exposure, that shaming, it actually led to real change.
It did. Tangible change. In the years that followed, the social conscience was pricked. Some of the most notorious slums, like the infamous Flower and Dean Street area, were finally demolished, rebuilt with better, more sanitary, more secure housing. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start.
And other improvements.
Street lighting was significantly improved across the East End. Dangerous, narrow alleyways were widened or closed off. The Ripper held up this horrifying mirror to Victorian society, and the reflection was so unbearable that the elite was shamed, or maybe just frightened, into action to improve the lives of those who survived the terror, at least somewhat.
So let's circle back. Why does this case, this cold case, still command such intense fascination over 130 years later? The unsolved puzzle is obviously part of it.
Only part of it, I think. It's largely because of when he struck, the dawn of mass media. He was effectively the first true media serial killer.
The archetype was created then.
Yeah, the archetype of the cunning, taunting phantom killer, playing games with the police and the public through the press. That became the blueprint for so many subsequent media representations of criminal nightmares. He's a fundamental piece of our modern crime mythology, really.
And he's a bespoke monster, as someone called him.
I like that phrase. Because we don't know who he was, he remains this shadowy, symbolic figure. We can project our own anxieties onto him. Back in 1888, he embodied the Victorian fears of the dangerous lower classes, the threat of immigrants, maybe degenerate aristocracy. Today, he can represent our fears of faceless violence, institutional corruption, the monster hidden in plain sight.
And that name.
The power of that simple, unforgettable name, Jack the Ripper, born from a journalistic hoax, most likely. But it created an identity for this specific type of evil that's far more powerful, far more enduring than the anonymous man who actually wielded the knife.
But let's finish where we maybe should have started and where we need to end, with the 5 women who had names and lives and struggles long before they became victims.
Polly Nichols, writing that hopeful letter home about her teetotaler employers, trying to convince her father and herself she was okay.
Annie Chapman, desperately trying to sell her little crocheted flowers and matches just to get by.
Elizabeth Stride, Long Liz, found clutching that small packet of Cashews breath mints in her hand when she died. Just a tiny, ordinary sign of her own dignity, her own attempt at normalcy.
Catherine Eddowes, whose last recorded words were that cheerful, maybe slightly drunken, "Good night, old cock," to the policeman who let her out.
And Mary Jane Kelly, the youngest, heard by neighbors singing an old Irish ballad, "A violet I plucked from mother's grave," just hours before she was silenced forever in that tiny room.
The true terror of Whitechapel, maybe, wasn't just the man with the knife.
No. It was also the darkness he revealed. In society, in the press, in the sheer indifference to human suffering that allowed those conditions to exist.
And that brings us to our final thought, a question for you listening to consider. What systemic monsters, what hidden structures of neglect or exploitation still walk unseen in the shadows of our own modern cities, whose presence is only truly revealed when society is finally forced, often by catastrophe, to look directly at the vulnerable among us?
And so, another chapter closes. For more journeys into history's forgotten files, please like and subscribe. Your next story awaits.